welcome back to more of me, a therapist, answering therapy questions. As always, feel free to ask your own. We're going to pull this camera in closer, look at that, get that background all in frame. Mostly in frame. Anyway, send your questions my way. If you like these, have any questions, leave them in this video. Might address them in the next one. But outside of that, my go-to is Quora. You all first who are listening, and then my trusted Quora. Most of which today coming from, if not all, the Therapist Exposed page, which sounds more dramatic than it really is. It's really just talking about therapy experiences. But the first question to start us out is this. Which celebrity do you think would make a brilliant therapist and why? I'm going to start by excluding celebrity therapists. There are some that are therapists in some capacity, or at least used to be. I'm going to leave them out. I did look at this question before we got going. It's the only one that I'm like prepping in advance. There wasn't really anyone that obvious that came to mind. I think there's a couple people that could maybe do a good job, but the person that did continue popping into my mind, someone I think could listen well, be respectable, and give space, probably be Keanu Reeves. I think he's pretty relaxed, can hold space, be a good, non-anxious presence, as they say you're supposed to be. However, I do think that Mr. Rogers would also probably do a fantastic job. So those would be my two answers, maybe one living and one deceased. Those would be really up there for celebrities, I think. I think they could pull it off. At the very least, they could be trained to do it quite well. So, yeah, that's a fun first one there. Okay, question 2. How can a person avoid transactional, conditional, and toxic relationships? Yes. Well, we can start from a practical perspective and acknowledge that a lot of relationship is transactional, and that's not necessarily bad. This question does not clarify if we're talking dating or just any relationships, but it's okay that some relationships have transaction to them. I think a lot of good relationships, healthy ones, have a sacrificial element. I'm willing to go out of my way and even make my life a little bit worse to be helpful and present for you. But there is a transactional element, which is why at a certain point it's not worth it in a lot of relationships, which is why we end friendships or even have to cut off family members at times. It's too heavy for us to manage. Conditional kind of fits with transactional, but again, if we're talking like romantic or just from a love perspective, like I will only love you if this, and same with toxic, how can we avoid those? Honestly, one of the faster ways to avoid them is to focus more on maybe two things, management and acknowledgement. So complete recognition prior is maybe difficult, but getting good at noticing certain themes for how we feel. Our gut doesn't feel good about this. Our, the interaction's it's not okay. And paying attention to when you're quick to shrug things off and be like, that was odd, but don't do that. Pay attention to those. Sometimes we do just need to get over certain things and acknowledge where maybe we are just having a bad day and we're feeling off, but that's why the reflection is useful. I will also tell you, I think one of the biggest tips to avoid unhealthy relationships is to involve other people in those relationships. This is why I think dating in groups is a really good idea. It's also why I think it's really helpful to, when you're dating someone or making new friends, bring them around your family and bring them around other friends. And ideally, over this time, you're working on creating healthy friendships and family. So I spend a lot of my time with really healthy people. So when new people come in, now I typically feel like I have a good gauge of someone, but other people can call that out quicker who I know are healthy relationships. So one of the better ways to do this is to actively work on relationships. And you might ask, well, what if I don't have very many? I'm trying to start that. It is harder at first, and you might get burned over and over. It's also important to pay attention to where you're hanging out. I don't want to just start getting super opinionated and judgmental about certain places or certain people. But for one example, if you're trying not to drink very much, it's probably not a good idea to try and meet new people at a bar or a club in high alcohol consumption places. If you want to do less drinking and you want to spend time with people who drink less, go where people who drink less go. And that doesn't mean go to like an AA meeting. It means don't go to places maybe with high alcohol consumption. So you want to set yourself up for success with that. And a lot of us, when we're changing relationships, we start to identify, well, this is the type of person I want to be around. But we don't change habits. And you need to start changing where you go and who you spend time with. Those are actually really, really important, is adjusting who your time is spent with. So start with that. I mean, I gave a handful of things there. But understanding how you feel is important. If you feel like the relationship's not healthy, try to acknowledge that. And this is where therapy can be useful, is ideally your therapist is healthy. It's not a given, but ideally. And you work on that. But definitely pay attention to the places you're spending time at. And any person you have in your life that's healthy, really rely on them for input into these things. It is a good question, because avoiding these are helpful. And then don't be afraid to end something after it's a little bit into it. So you're 5 dates in and something's not right, and you're like, oh, but I'm so invested. Cutting it off at 5 dates is better than years of torment and awful. So, don't be afraid to cut it out when you notice it. Cut your losses. It's fine. You'll be happier, assuming it's the right choice to do it at the right time than to wait. Okay, question 3. Here we go. If you could wave your magic wand and change the way we deliver mental health services, what changes would you make? Change the way we deliver the services. That's a good question. I don't want to get too hung up on semantics, but I'm a little hung up on how we deliver it. So I can read that kind of 2 ways. One is like the modes that we do it, so in a therapy room, but also maybe the approaches and styles. One might be, and I want to really be careful because there's a lot of opinions and thoughts I have about both therapy world and personal world, about ways that people could live and have a better life and better experiences. But they're not necessarily things that I think should be law, because autonomy is important. So there are certain things that I think are better, but it's risky to start making these rules. But one thing that would be helpful is probably if more therapists utilized theories that work. There's a lot of that doesn't happen. There's a lot of people just kind of using what they think makes sense, and they don't really have research or evidence to back those up. We actually have a subsect of theoretical interventions and therapies that are called evidence-based theories. They're their own category because it's not assumed that the way someone's doing therapy is backed by evidence, which seems crazy, but we'll actually specify that at times. Like, this is an evidence-based theory, which is wild. Those are things like cognitive behavioral therapy. Gottman therapy is evidence-based, and there's hundreds of therapies out there. And people kind of make their own. A lot of people say, well, I'm an eclectic therapist, which means they just kind of do whatever they want, usually is what they're saying. Sometimes, if someone says they're eclectic, you should ask them what they're drawing from. I would technically sit in the realm of eclectic, but I could tell you what it is. It's primarily collaborative language systems, which is technically a postmodern approach, and it is my primary. But I do use symbolic experiential therapy when I'm doing family work primarily. So when there's multiple people in the room, typically that's my approach versus collaborative language systems. There's elements of both that I take from, and then there's a couple other modalities and interventions that I like from other things that I'll throw in there. But it's important for me to look at the evidence for these things. So that would be one. I also think I overall lean towards getting rid of all these laws that don't let therapists provide therapy across state lines. Um, there's been a lot of push for therapists to be able to provide mental health services in different states virtually. And overall, I think it's a good thing. There's probably some good arguments out there. I haven't heard them for why this isn't a good idea. Some people think it gives other therapists room to come into other people's space. In my view of that, from a business perspective, from a market perspective, is if you open up the doors for everyone to do business, and then one state starts to lose business, my assumption is that they're not trained as well to do the work. So should they even really be doing it? And I think that if everyone has access to any therapist in the country via telehealth, if that's what they're choosing to use, then it just ups the standard for everyone. You have to get better at your job. It's kind of my idea. It does lean itself towards maybe people who are better at marketing to do that. I can acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, even if you're good at marketing, you're not going to keep clients if you're bad at your job. So I do think that opening up the state lines pretty much just means if you're not as good, you can't hide behind certain jurisdictions. Not that people are actively doing that, but I think it encourages people to do better at their job. Yeah, I'm a fan of that. And there's occasional, there was some stuff during COVID and during natural disasters where states will give temporary allowance for therapists to provide virtual care to victims of disaster. Great. I just think it makes sense to have that open all the time. So, yeah, that's my stance on that. Those would be my two things. Right on. Question 4. Would you agree that the therapist brings with them the sum of their experience to the psychotherapy room is far more predictive of therapeutic success and client prognosis than the type of therapeutic interventions used to treat people? So would I agree that what the therapist brings with them is more effective than the interventions? Yeah. Yeah, to me, that's just a training question. Just like someone who, a good example, there are people who have watched football every Sunday their entire life. And they could tell you all the stats, they could tell you all the plays, they could tell you exactly how the sport is played perfectly. You put them out on a field, they're going to be horrible. It's because they understand the game extremely well, but they don't know how to play. And that example falls a little bit short because sometimes maybe it's a 5'2" dude in a wheelchair. Of course, they're not going to work well, but even a 6'8", 300-pound guy who's never actually played the sport but knows it really well, he's going to fail when he gets out there to play. So knowledge about something does not translate to ability to perform that thing. So a therapist who's all big talk about interventions, it doesn't mean that they actually understand how to do the nuance, because there's an art element. Sports have a creativity element. There's a physical aspect, of course, too. But there's a nuance to the therapeutic process. And everything has that, even surgery. You can understand surgery perfectly, but you still have to practice surgery and doing the actual thing. It's just not the same until you get in there. And therapy is the same way. So I think, what the therapist brings is more important than the intervention. I do think at the end of the day, someone who's good at the therapist side of things is more effective than an expert in a theory. And I hesitate because you could say, well, doing the therapist side means you understand the theories. And I think there's an element of that's true. So there's a little bit of a fine line or overlap with that. But yeah, your experience as a therapist is more important, which I think it's why getting all the hours in and just doing it over and over and over and over and over again. And if you record your sessions, or if you're a student and you have to watch them, I would actually watch them. Try to get better. Take feedback whenever you can. And yes, study your theory, but who you are and your experiences matter. And a lot of that comes from how you handle the session. So you gain experience per session. You should maybe reflect on how the session went. Did you get feedback? Are you stuck in your own cycle of feedback? Are you, I don't know, even trying to get better? Or are you just like, well, I went to school, so I know what I'm doing now? It doesn't translate. Getting a really good score on the exam doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. There's often a high correlation between those things, but it doesn't necessarily imply a one-to-one. So, yeah, both are important, but I would say who the therapist is more important than their full scope of intervention. Now, it does talk about client prognosis. It's a therapist's experience, predictive client prognosis. So prognosis just means essentially what to expect from the diagnosis. So if someone says you have, we're giving you a PTSD diagnosis, the prognosis is this is what to expect from the treatment going forward, including potential benefits. So if you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we're going to do a very specific type of trauma intervention, I might want to tell you the prognosis for this is I would expect maybe this to look a certain way 3 to 6 months from now. That can also be addressed without the plan necessarily. So you could say, hey, left untreated, this is what we might expect in terms of this getting worse or staying the same over time. So it's just it's a best guess, educated guess of what to expect. And so that one is actually maybe intervention, but that's more specialist. So someone who's very well studied on eating disorders and very well practiced on it, maybe even worked in clinics or agencies just focus on that, they're probably going to be really well studied on what to expect. So you could argue that someone who's very well studied is going to do a better job of giving a prognosis than someone who's just good at therapy. So those things aren't actually quite the same skill set. So yeah, it's a good question. Being well-rounded is probably best, my opinion of that. Be well-rounded. Cool. All right. Question 5, and depending on how long this one takes, this might be the last one. Do all therapists have more or less the same capabilities? No. More or less. They're often trained similarly, but so much of it is the person and what they put into it. It'd be like saying, here's maybe a good example to bring sports back in. Do all soccer players have more or less the same capabilities? Yeah, and soccer is actually much more narrow than therapy. Therapy is actually much broader. I don't have it in front of me, but the AMFTRB, American Marriage and Family Therapy Review Board, I believe, they're the ones who give you the criteria for what to expect from the clinical level exam, the national exam. If I remember, it had about 170 things that you should know. Unbelievable what you're supposed to know before you take it. Just to give you an example, one category was, and it might not be 170, I'm really trying to remember. It's a ton though. I don't feel like that number's off, but it's so many things. I'd have to double check. It might even be as low as 50, but categorically this should still paint a picture. Understanding all of the DSM diagnoses. That was one category. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. That's everything you could diagnose someone with a mental health issue. You're supposed to know everything in that book. Not be able to reference the book, but know it. Everything. I've never met anyone who knows everything in that. I know people who are specialized in certain sections. It's so much to know everything. One of them is on like sex therapy and sex education, knowing the entirety of that. There's a whole subdivision, ASECT, American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Sex educators, counselors, and therapists, I think. A whole subfield that you can get specialized in, and you're supposed to know like all of that before you take the exam. Every theory, every approach, everything about cultural awareness, and how to respond appropriately to that. Like, it's unbelievable. And nobody knows all of that when you go in. You can't. No therapist at the end of the day is going to know all of that. It's incredible. So people are going to have a different amount of interest when they get into the field. So everyone should know how to sit with a client. They should know how to approach paperwork. They should know the laws and ethics of their degree and their jurisdictions. But they might not know even any of the same interventions, to be blunt. I can't think of any intervention that every therapist has learned. Your university will just pick ones to teach, and they're usually connected with the founders of your field. So I'm a marriage and family therapist, so a lot of the theories we learned are founded by other marriage and family therapists. Not exclusively. We learn ones that other universities learn as well, but it's hard to know. But they're not all the same. Do they have more or less the same? Maybe in just a baseline general, but the more correct answer is probably no. They just don't. Different skill levels, different understanding, different perspectives, different training, different locations that they live in. That matters too. The university you went to, how much extra work you've spent to study more. No, and I think if you're a client listening to this, or you're someone who's interested in therapy, do not be afraid to ask questions on your consultation calls or with your emails. It's important to get a good fit. Not every therapist is good at their job. Not every therapist is a good fit for you. Not every therapist knows what you need to be successful. Ask your questions. If you have concerns, bring them up. Pay attention to how they respond. Do they feel defensive? Don't work with a therapist that's defensive to your questions. Don't approach the question aggressively or rudely. Be genuine, and then don't work with someone who seems super defensive, or they don't want to answer, or they're really hiding an answer from you, it feels like. What theories do you use? I take a lot of different approaches. We're going to find just what you need. Stay away from that one, because what they're saying is I don't have an approach. I just walk in and figure it out as I go. No, they should be able to tell you. I start very basic. I explain very minimally kind of what I do from just as layman understanding as I can. And then if someone's interested more, I up the verbiage, I up the language, I up the detail to accommodate their question more. And so I think if a therapist can't do that, there's a question of, do they even know what they're doing when they walk in? And I think they can know what they're doing, but they're so all over the board and they don't get focused. And so, there's a lot in that, I think. So, yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. So I'll probably go ahead and leave it there. We're about 22 minutes in. Ask your questions below. I want to hear them. I want to answer them. If you're interested in therapy services, reach out to me. I'll do what I can to get you connected. And these are fun news update. I'm going to hope to do these every Friday for a while is my goal. So hope you enjoy, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Bye.